You think the hard part of building wealth is getting rich. That is wrong. The hard part is surviving long enough to flip the switch. I have watched people work for 20 years and never build a dollar of real freedom. Not because they were lazy, not because they were stupid, and not because they lacked talent. They stayed trapped because they never crossed the first psychological threshold. They never got the machine to turn on. You keep staring at the wrong number. You think the first meaningful milestone is $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million. It is not. The first brutal threshold is the first 1,000 that stays yours. Not the 1,000 that lands in your checking account on payday and disappears into rent, takeout, subscriptions, and minimum payments. Not the 1,000 you touch for a weekend and then explain away. I mean the first 1,000 that survives your moods, your impulses, your excuses, your family scripts, your cheap little rewards, your fatigue, your loneliness, your Friday night rationalizations, and your ancient urge to grab what feels good now and let the future beg for scraps. That first 1,000 is harder than the next 10,000 because before that switch flips, every dollar you save feels like self-punishment. After it flips, every dollar you waste feels like self-sabotage. That is the whole game. Most people never understand this because they think money is arithmetic. They think if the spreadsheet says save 100 a month, then the problem is simple. Earn, subtract, repeat. But money is not arithmetic first. Money is identity first. Before the first 1,000, you are trying to save with a brain trained for immediate relief. After the first 1,000, you are saving with proof. That difference sounds small. It changes everything. I am going to say something that may offend you, and it should. A broke life is not just a low, balanced life. It is a brain state. It is a way of interpreting every dollar as either relief, entertainment, sedation, or temporary dignity. It is a pattern where money comes in carrying possibility and leaves carrying excuses. You tell yourself you are bad at saving. No, most of the time you are not bad at saving. You are still operating with the switch off. When the switch is off, the future has no emotional weight. Dinner tonight beats security 6 months from now. A sale this afternoon beats optionality next year. A phone payment plan beats an emergency fund. A weekend out beats a brokerage contribution. That is not because you are defective. It is because your brain is designed to overvalue the visible and underprice the distant. The future version of you is treated like a weak stranger with a boring face and no voting power. That is why ordinary people can look at a $50 meal and feel excitement. But look at saving that same $50 and feel nothing. The money did not change. The emotional coding changed. This is the first invisible tax on your life. I call it the now tax. The now tax is what you pay every time immediate emotion outranks future strength. Poor people pay it. Middle-class people pay it. High-income people pay it. The salary does not remove it. The job title does not remove it. The neighborhood does not remove it. Only a new identity removes it, and that identity does not arrive when somebody posts a motivational quote about compounding. It arrives when your own behavior hands your brain a piece of evidence it cannot argue with. I can do this. That sentence is more valuable than most personal finance content on the internet. Because before you have evidence, advice feels insulting. People tell you to save $100 a month, and you hear fantasy. People tell you to invest consistently, and you hear condescension. People tell you to build a buffer, and you hear judgment. Why? Because if you have never held on to a real financial base, those ideas do not feel strategic. They feel theatrical. They feel like advice for some other species. You think wealthy people must have started with a different brain, a different family, a different temperament, a different genetic relationship to discipline. They did not. Many of them simply got the switch to flip. That first 1,000 is the ignition point where your brain stops treating saving as deprivation and starts treating saving as evidence. Once that happens, the machine changes its sound. Before the switch, every act of saving feels like something is being taken from you. After the switch, every act of saving feels like something is being built for you. I want you to understand how violent this difference really is. If you have zero savings, or almost zero, every decision has teeth. Every problem becomes emotional. A car repair is panic. A bad week at a dental bill is panic. A rent increase is panic. A manager's mood becomes a threat to your shelter. A delayed paycheck becomes a threat to your groceries. An unexpected flight home becomes a moral crisis. That is not just stressful. It is cognitively expensive. You cannot allocate capital well when your nervous system believes every inconvenience is an attack. You cannot think like an owner when your body is stuck in emergency mode. This is why people with almost nothing saved so often make decisions that look irrational from the outside. They are not merely making bad financial choices. They are trying to purchase emotional oxygen. Lunch out is not lunch out. It is relief. The new shoes are not shoes. They are dignity. The drinks are not drinks. They are anesthesia. The subscription is not a subscription. It is escape. The finance car is not transportation. It is self-respect rented at compound interest. And then someone in a suit tells them to stop buying coffee, as though the central problem is caffeine. That misses the point completely. The point is not that $5 matters. The point is that $5 repeated under the rule of the wrong identity becomes a vote for the wrong future. You do not build wealth one grand decision at a time. You build it one identity, consistent vote at a time. This is why the first 1,000 is so hard. You are not just withholding spending. You are rewriting emotional meaning. You are teaching yourself that comfort now is not always the highest use of money. You are teaching yourself that the purchase is not the reward. Control is the reward. You are teaching yourself that $1 does not need to become a latte, a jacket, a gadget, a meal, or a brief mood enhancer just because it touched your hand. It can become a soldier. It can become a vote. It can become a brick. It can become proof that you are no longer a person who leaks every opportunity that enters your life. The internet loves to talk about compounding as if it starts in the brokerage account. It does not. Compounding starts in self-respect. The first compounding is psychological. You save 100, then 200, then 400, then 600, then 1,000. And what grows first is not the account. What grows first is the story your brain tells about you. I am not a person who always ends at zero. I am not a person who needs to spend every surprise dollar. I am not a person who has to be emotionally manipulated by every urge. I am not a spectator in my own financial life. Now the machine has a pulse. That is why people who save their first meaningful base often move faster afterward, even before the math becomes impressive. They stop negotiating against themselves. That is the hidden mechanism. Most people think behavior creates results. That is only half true. Behavior creates evidence. Evidence creates identity. Identity makes future behavior cheaper. That is the loop. And once that loop flips in your favor, what felt impossible starts to feel obvious. Let me make it physical. Suppose you save $100 a month before the switch. That feels humiliatingly small. 10 months to reach 1,010 long months. 10 long months of wondering whether this is even worth it. 10 long months of watching friends spend freely while you feel like a stingy extra in your own life. That stretch is where most people quit. Not because the math failed, because the identity never stabilized, but suppose you stay there long enough to get the first 1,000 to hold. Now a new thing enters the room: momentum, not fantasy, momentum. You keep adding 100. Your cash begins to sit differently in your mind. You stop seeing the account as a sad puddle. You start seeing it as a base, a quiet machine, a small but real engine. Then you invest consistently, even modestly, even imperfectly. Now time joins your side. At a plain return, not some circus return, the money begins to contribute. Your second 1,000 comes a little faster, then the next a little faster, then the next faster still. Nothing magical, nothing sexy, just the insultingly boring truth that money already saved reduces the burden on money not yet saved. That is when poor math turns into powerful math. And it is also when poor psychology turns into powerful psychology. Because the account is no longer just a place you sack, it is now a scoreboard, a mirror, a witness. You look at the balance, and for the first time in years it does not accuse you, it confirms you. That may be the most underrated pleasure in adult life. Most people think money buys stuff. Amateurs think that wealth does not first buy stuff. Wealth buys angles, it buys patience, it buys the ability to leave a bad job without begging. It buys the ability to say no to a rotten boss. It buys the ability to make a choice because it is wise, not because it is urgent. It buys room between stimulus and reaction. It buys the right to think. That is why the first 1,000 matters so much. It is not large enough to make you wealthy, but it is large enough to interrupt helplessness. And helplessness is expensive. A helpless person takes the shift he hates. A helpless person renews the lease she cannot stand. A helpless person carries bad debt longer because she cannot breathe. A helpless person delays fixing small problems until they become major costs. A helpless person mistakes every paycheck for rescue instead of raw material. Once the switch flips, you begin to interpret money differently. A tax refund stops looking like vacation money and starts looking like acceleration fuel. A bonus stops looking like permission and starts looking like leverage. A gift stops looking like play money and starts looking like a chance to widen the gap between your current life and your fragile life. This is another place where ordinary people get ambushed. They mentally classify money by where it came from. Job income is serious. Gift money is playful. Refund money is disposable. Found money is harmless. Wrong, every dollar has one identity test. Does it leave you stronger or weaker? That is the only classification that matters. If a dollar makes you more optional, more buffered, more patient, more capable of refusing nonsense, that dollar served you. If it disappears into an impulse that leaves no residue except memory, that dollar was consumed twice. Once by the purchase, and again by the future flexibility you gave up. To make it, you have to become ruthless about this without becoming joyless. There is a difference. Joyless people cut spending and become bitter. Strategic people redirect spending and become harder to kill. That is what I want for you, not a smaller life. A stronger one. I have spent my life watching people misunderstand the purpose of money. They think money is there to prove they are successful, so they wear it. They think money is there to make pain disappear, so they numb themselves with it. They think money is there to help them keep up, so they sacrifice their future to avoid looking behind. They think money is there to create the appearance of ease, that is juvenile. Money is there to convert your good behavior into durable freedom, that is mature. And when you finally see that, the first 1,000 stops being a random milestone and becomes a kind of declaration. I do not have to leak all my energy through consumption. I do not have to obey every appetite. I do not have to remain available for financial humiliation. I can hold the line. That line, holding, is where confidence comes from. Not from affirmations, not from pretending, from repeated acts of private control. Now, let us get honest about why so many people fail before the switch flips. They fail because they try to solve an emotional problem with a numerical lecture. They say, I should save more. That is not a system. They say, I need more discipline. That is not a system. They say, starting next month, I will do better. That is not a system either. You do not defeat impulse with slogans. You defeat impulse with architecture. You create friction where you used to create convenience. You automate where you used to negotiate. You separate where you used to mix. You rename money where you used to casually blur it. If you want the first 1,000 to arrive, you must stop treating all cash as one emotional pool. You need a survival account, a spending account, and a fortress account at minimum. Not because banks need more buckets, because your brain does. The spending account is where life happens. The fortress account is where your future learns to breathe. Once those are mixed, spending will always win because spending is vivid and the future is quiet. The future loses most arguments because it speaks softly. So make the system speak for it. Auto transfer on payday. A transfer that happens before your lifestyle gets a vote. A savings target with a visible name that is not vague and not cute. Not rainy day. Call it I do not panic anymore. Call it I can walk away. Call it my manager is not my landlord. Call it no more midnight fear. People laugh at naming systems like that. Let them laugh. The average person also stays trapped for 20 years while explaining to himself that he deserves every indulgence that keeps him weak. Your job is not to look normal. Your job is to get the switch to flip, then protect it, then feed it, then widen it. Another reason the first 1,000 is harder than the next 10,000 is that before it arrives, every act of saving comes directly from behavior. After it arrives, behavior gets help. That help first comes from identity, then from math. At 10,000 invested, even at a modest pace, the account starts producing evidence you did not manually create. A gain here, a dividend there, a month where the line rises even though you did nothing dramatic, a week where your money labors while you sleep. Now, your effort is not working alone. That matters enormously. When people say money makes money, they often say it in a lazy way. What they should say is this: money changes the burden. Sharing arrangement. At 0, you carry everything. At 1,000, you carry almost everything, but now you are carrying it with a different mind. At 10,000, the machine speaks loudly enough that even doubters hear it. At 100,000, the machine begins to alter your posture. You walk differently when you know one bad month does not destroy your dignity. You negotiate differently when you are not secretly terrified. You invest differently when you are not begging for immediate confirmation. This is why wealthy people look calm in situations that emotionally shred everyone else. It is not always wisdom. Often it is buffer. Buffer is underrated intelligence. A person with no buffer must optimize for survival. A person with buffer can optimize for return. That is a gigantic difference, and it is why telling people to just invest for the long run is such an incomplete sentence. The long run only works if you can survive the short run without liquidating your future for immediate relief. That is what the first 1,000 begins to solve. It is not enough, but it is enough to begin telling the truth to your nervous system. We are not one surprise away from collapse. That sentence can save a life. Now I want to say something unfashionable. Your spending is often less about desire than about pain management. A lot of bad financial behavior is disguised emotional treatment. You buy lunch because your job feels dead and those 20 minutes feel like oxygen. You upgrade your phone because novelty is easier than purpose. You shop because control in the store feels easier than control in your life. You go out because loneliness terrifies you more than overdraft risk. You finance nonsense because the monthly payment disguises the injury. Once you understand that, you stop insulting yourself with shallow advice. You also stop indulging yourself with shallow excuses. You do not need shame. You need replacement. If spending gives you stimulation, saving must give you stimulation. If buying gives you proof of motion, investing must give you proof of motion. If consumption feels like progress, your account growth must become visible enough to compete. That is why I like visible dashboards, account trackers, automatic graphs, and named goals. Not because visuals are cute, because the brain respects what it can see moving. You are competing against impulse, and impulse has bright lights, fast delivery, and emotional hooks. So make your future visible, make the switch audible, make progress undeniable. Check your Fortress account and feel the right kind of pride. Watch the balance rise and let that become the reward. That is not obsession, that is rewiring. And once the rewiring is underway, the second 10,000 really does come differently. Not because the world gets nicer, because you stop living like an accidental person. You stop treating yourself like a hallway through which money passes. You begin treating yourself like a capital allocator. That is a very different identity. Capital allocators do not ask, "Can I afford the payment?" They ask, "What does this payment kill?" Capital allocators do not ask, "Do I deserve this?" They ask, "What is the opportunity cost of using a freedom dollar for a mood purchase?" Capital allocators do not ask, "How can I look okay this month?" They ask, "How do I make next year harder to break?" That is why the transformation can look so dramatic to outsiders. Your broke friends think you became stingy, maybe. Or maybe you finally understood that every recurring expense is not just a line item. It is an employee you hired to work against your freedom. The coffee is not coffee. The impulse shopping is not shopping. The finance toy is not a toy. The daily delivery is not dinner. They are all future-canceling votes if repeated mindlessly enough. I am not telling you to never enjoy your life. I am telling you to stop confusing spending with enjoyment and expense with status and relief with reward. A lot of what people call living a little is just dying a little more slowly while pretending it is sophistication. The first 1,000 forces you to confront that, because to save it, something has to be refused. A story has to be broken. A habit has to lose. An identity has to be retired. And that is why the first 1,000 is the hardest. It is not financially large, but it is psychologically disobedient. It requires you to stop worshiping the now. Then something extraordinary happens. The switch flips, and the very same brain that used to sabotage you begins to recruit for you. You start noticing wasted spending faster. You start wanting to increase income, not so you can inflate your lifestyle, but so you can feed the machine. You start caring about fees, taxes, account structures, debt interest, and return drag, because for the first time you understand that tiny percentages can become giant theft. If given enough years, you start thinking beyond the transaction and toward the system. That is the beginning of adulthood in capital allocation, not age, system awareness. Then the snowball people talk about begins to mean something real, not as poetry. As burden transfer, your effort is still required, but not alone. At 20,000, the account starts to make meaningful contributions. At 50,000, it starts to feel like a silent assistant. At higher numbers, the machine begins to carry loads that used to crush you. Then freedom becomes visible, not theoretical. You can take a different job. You can endure a temporary setback without collapse. You can walk away from a stupid deal. You can resist pressure from people who used to control you simply because they controlled your access to short-term safety. That is why I say money buys angles. And those angles start with the first 1,000 that stays put. Do not underestimate the dignity of that. There are people with good incomes and no angle. There are people with shiny cars and no angle. There are people in large homes with no angle. There are people with expensive tastes and no angle. $1,000 Fortress account can give a poorer person more real dignity than a luxury payment gives a richer fool, because one is strength, the other is theater. I want you to hear this clearly. The goal is not $1,000 forever. The goal is to become the kind of person for whom $1,000 is the first locked brick, not the final dream. Then 10,000 becomes a mission, not a fantasy. Then 100,000 becomes a machine, not a miracle. Then your life stops being organized around financial emergencies and starts being organized around deliberate choices. That is the shift. That is why the rich often tell you the first real chunk is the hardest. They are not romanticizing struggle. They are telling you where the switch is hidden. It is hidden in the period where the account looks unimpressive. The rewards feel delayed, the sacrifices seem invisible, and your old identity keeps whispering that this is pointless. That whisper is the final guard at the gate. Most people obey it. A smaller group walks past it, and the reason they later look so calm, so strategic, so patient is not because they never felt temptation. It is because they won the ugliest phase of the fight. The phase where nothing glamorous is happening, the phase where no one applauds, the phase where you still look ordinary to the outside world, the phase where you are doing violence to your old wiring, one automatic transfer at a time. That is where wealth starts. Quietly, without permission, without applause, without looking impressive. I have a very simple test for whether you are serious. The next time money enters your life, before your appetite touches it, before your mood speaks, before your friends suggest something, before your stress invents a reward, ask one question. Is this dollar going to confirm my old identity or fund my new one? That is the door. Stand there honestly, because once the switch flips, your life stops being a series of money emergencies and starts becoming a series of money choices. And once you taste that, you will never again confuse spending with living. You will understand that the first 1,000 was not hard because the amount was large. It was hard because the old you had to lose. Now choose which version of you gets paid next.